I'm Gary Venner, CEO of IFA Acquisitions, and I'm joined by Gemma Irvine, who's the HR lead and director of HR People Support, who run trusted outsourced HR partner support, where we continue our informative question and answer series on our YouTube channel to provide insights into helping buyers and sellers understand the benefits of using HR specialists for the buying and selling of IFA businesses for sound HR advice. The title of the next video is coming up on the screen now. So all of that process, that consultation process, should be done by the seller, is that right?
So generally speaking, you've got obligations from the seller's perspective and the acquirer's perspective. So they both have obligations to inform and consult at different stages. Sometimes in kind of successful 2P processes, you can work together in terms of consultation. So you might come together in a consultation meeting and have the incoming employer and the outgoing employer in the same room to be able to consult together, and that really demonstrates that kind of trusting relationship and really ensures that both employers are listening and understanding to what's going on, but it's also really important for transparency, so that the employees feel like that united relationship is key to the success of the transfer. As I said, the outgoing employer will have obligations to inform in terms of when the transfer is happening, why the transfer is happening, what's going to happen.
So that's basically the purpose behind the inform.
Absolutely, and then the incoming employer will have the obligation to inform about what's going to happen post-transfer. So what happens in terms of the effect of their contract of employment. There might be measures within their contracts of employment that they have to make changes to. So that might be payday or place of work, measures around those elements of the contract that need to be adjusted to affect the contract going forward. So those measures are important for the incoming employer to consult with during that period.
That sounds good. And certainly as a broker, you know, I've been involved in many of those discussions and consultation meetings, and I would totally agree. I think it works absolutely at best when there's the vendor and the acquirer in that meeting, because then all questions can be answered, you know, and it can be, well, what will this look like in the new world? So I definitely think it is important.
One thing just to mention around that is the kind of the redundancy situation. So potentially there could be redundancies that happen as a result of them coming together. But it's really important that where they might envisage redundancies taking place during that consultation period, is really important that is it is made transparent, and that is something that is discussed during those consultation meetings.
So Gemma, around the consultation process, what are the important timings that should be sort of adhered to?
I think it's important to note that for the consultation you need to provide adequate notice. So it needs to be reasonable for those affected by the transfer. It's obviously going to depend on the size of the business and how many people are affected, but generally I would say between 2 and 4 weeks is enough. You wouldn't want to be giving less than that.
Sure. Yeah, and that's 2 to 4 weeks before the completion date, is that right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So Gemma, sometimes there's going to be a situation where the acquiring firm may not need all of the staff of the seller's business, particularly where there's sort of duplication of roles, etc. So in those situations, who is responsible for the redundancy? Is this the buyer or the seller?
So before any transfer happens before any completion date, the seller is unable to make any redundancies once you've started that process. So once you've kind of given ELI information, the acquirer has kind of taken that on board and has agreed to proceed. At that point, the seller can't make any redundancies because that's would be deemed directly linked to the transfer and would be void.
Yeah.
So the incoming employer, the acquirer, would be responsible for redundancies going forward. What they have to do is, during that consultation period before the transfer date, is give information around the prospect of possible redundancies in the future.
Right.
So they have to let employees know that there is a possibility that that may happen because of duplication of roles or diminishing work or whatever it may be. There is a possibility where the incoming employer could start redundancy consultations before the transfer date.
Oh, okay.
So they can start those redundancy consultations, but that has to be with the agreement of the outgoing employer.
Yeah.
And actually they might not want to do that because it provides further unsettlement for employees. So it really depends on the situation and depends on the business and what they're envisaging. But the incoming employer is going to be responsible for those redundancies.
And would the incoming employer also consider their own staff in being in that process as well? Because presumably, to give the incoming staff a fair chance that they might be more capable of having those retained roles, for instance. So do they normally involve all staff? Or?
Absolutely. So in order for the reason for dismissal to be a fair reason, redundancy is a fair reason for dismissal, but it can't be directly linked to the transfer.
Yeah.
So except where there's an ETO reason. So what we have to do is make sure any redundancy process is fair and robust. That means for any roles that there's duplication or there's overlap with the existing staff and the incoming staff, you have to pull employees that are doing similar roles. You have to have a fair selection criteria, and you have to go through that redundancy process for all affected. And that's really important, that redundancy process is a fair redundancy process and covers both existing and incoming staff. But you also then have to make sure that you've got evidence to be able to demonstrate that there is an ETO reason under the TUPE obligation. So you can't make a redundancy dismissal purely because of the transfer. So there has to be an additional reason in order for it to be considered fair.
Now, if I'm right, you've mentioned ETO, and I understand that's economic, technical, organisational reasons, yeah, and those can be valid reasons for redundancy. Am I right?
Yes, they can. They can be valid reasons where they are the sole or principal reason for the change in either the number of people that you have or the change in roles that they might be doing. So you have to be careful around using the ETO reasons for the redundancy, but yes, they can be a fair and valid reason. But it's really important to be able to kind of ensure that the acquiring employer is able to demonstrate that actually there is a diminished work or there are overlapping roles, and you've then gone through the process fairly in order to demonstrate that all the different levels that are fair for any potential tribunal to agree with.